Last year's MW2 was a bit of a tepid release considering the magnitude of the game that it was following up. I've been saying it every year since it came out, but MW 2019 was truly an inflection point for what was a very stale, lost franchise. Though some of that goodwill was squandered in the years that followed, with a milquetoast Black Ops game that went back to the old engine, and Sledgehammer's Vanguard, which is arguably the worst mainline COD game. Anyway, MW2's multiplayer took things in a very unexpected direction by leaning into the Milsim-inspired seasoning that gave 2019 a fresh feel and making it the overall direction of the core gameplay. Just about every action was slower, recoil was stronger, and damage falloff was the most noticeable it had ever been in a COD game. It was a much more hardcore and punishing gameplay style that I thought went too far in the context of a casual arcade shooter, and it was paired up with an equal parts mediocre and sparse map selection, as well as a very goofy implementation of the perk system. After playing it, my gut feeling was that many of the changes and new mechanics were intended for Warzone, which is likely a far bigger priority for Activision now than the core multiplayer experience, as sad as that may be. While it led to a somewhat confused identity in the multiplayer, I thought the gamble paid off for Warzone 2.0. I had a fantastic time with it at launch, and it's been my most played multiplayer game for the past year. That sentiment is pretty unique to me though. It was relentlessly lambasted by popular streamers and esports players, as well as many COD diehards online, and for the past year, Raven has been hard at work reshaping the identity of what Warzone 2.0 was intended to be to appease that audience, albeit to mixed effect. Overall, the past year has not been great for Warzone and COD in general. MW2 dwindled quickly after launch, and Warzone is still playing catch-up to get back to the level of popularity it had prior to 2.0. Now, the word on the street last year was that MW2 would be the first 2-year COD game. Then Modern Warfare 3 was announced, and my expectations for how this 2-year cycle would play out were somewhat subverted. While it is going to be sold as a full-price standalone title, MW3 is more like a massive patch and content expansion for MW2, and while I think the value proposition of that is a bit insulting, it's definitely still a better route to go than forcing out yet another half-baked, all-new entry, or letting MW2 languish with drip-feed updates. So yes, while this is another year, another COD in technicality, it's also the biggest change to the franchise's strategy in its history. Extending the shelf life of these COD games and giving the all-new entries more breathing room to develop is 100% the right move and long overdue in my opinion. They should have started this formula with MW 2019. Despite that, my feeling going into this was not very good. With the return of slide canceling, a movement exploit that came to define high-level Warzone 1 gameplay, being one of the first teased and most anticipated features, I knew that this really wasn't going to be a game that appealed to me. This has been outwardly advertised as being that fan-pleaser game, something intended to right the perceived wrongs of last year. While I don't think MW2 was anywhere close to a flawless game, I think every game that's gone this route of design via feedback has become a joyless, homogenized bore. Something made for some ambiguous sense of balance and competition rather than fun. The exact type of game design that I lamented in my Halo Infinite review, as well as my video on Warzone 2.0 earlier this year. Then there's the fact that this is a Sledgehammer game, the indisputable weak link in the 3-developer chain. After Vanguard, my faith in them is the lowest it's ever been, though the nature of this release is admittedly a less onerous task than an all-new title. Needless to say, I didn't have high hopes going in, and for me, this is a game where the publisher's strategy and the audience's reception of it is going to be more interesting than the game itself. Regardless, it's a yearly tradition for me to tackle these betas, and after hitting level 30, I think I'm qualified to have an opinion. From the second you take control, it is readily apparent that MW2's design philosophy has been relegated to history. Every action you take in MW3 is faster, and the transitions between actions are quick to borderline non-existent, to the point where it feels closer to old COD than MW19. Inputs are kind of weightless in this game as a result, with gun feel trading in last year's beefy impact in favor of slick responsiveness. The base ADS time on all weapons is significantly faster. Recoil, both statistically and visually, is massively reduced. Reload cancelling is back, and the severe damage falloff, specifically on SMGs, is gone. This is all paired with sound design that is, to me, a massive downgrade from last year and 2019. It's very reminiscent of Vanguard's anemic sound design, so I'm just going to assume that it's the Sledgehammer House style. The overall feel and feedback through audio and animation work is nowhere near as solid as MW2 or even the current build of Warzone, though it is at least very responsive, which was clearly the priority. Then the movement. It's this buzzword, it's the only thing anyone wants to talk about regarding this game, and the changes made are directly addressing the concerns of streamers and competitive players, almost beat for beat in line with everything that demographic has been complaining about for the last year. Movement speed is faster across the board, with tweaks like tactical sprint recharging during normal sprint and mantling being faster. Sliding provides a larger and more immediate burst of speed and allows for more maneuverability. And of course, you can now slide cancel again, which simply means that you can press the jump button at any time to break out of the animation with little penalty. The only notable all-new component is tac stance, which is kind of a confused feature, I think. It's a middle ground between hipfire and full-on ADS, though it's bound to right-click or left trigger like ADS, so you have to toggle which one you want, which kind of defeats the purpose of it. I quickly came to the determination that it had no value. I basically only ever saw it during slides, where it then transitions to full-on ADS after the slide animation is complete. It's barely any more accurate than hipfire, yet requires most of the time and effort of ADS, which is already quite fast here. I don't know what its purpose is supposed to be in the sandbox, and it feels like Sledgehammer just wanted to add something new for the sake of adding something new, sort of like how they added blind fire in Vanguard. Outside of that anomaly, the prevailing theme here with the changes is a lack of penalty, the complete opposite of last year's design philosophy that made players commit to their actions. It's also overall a very fast game, as you can likely see in the footage. In fact, just about as fast as it could possibly be without resorting to true enhanced mobility like Titanfall or Advanced Warfare. I think it's too fast for a boots-on-the-ground game, and the changes to gunplay feel like a regression from MW19, but the real issue here is how all those changes interact with the TTK, which is long. Really long, apparently like Cold War long. You have all these players running around at breakneck speed with the ability to slide in thruster-like bursts with a large health pool, which means long fights with highly erratic enemies. It's punishing to keep up with aim-wise, especially on keyboard and mouse. I continue to maintain that high TTK does not mix well with fast gameplay. Everything about this game is telling you to go fast and be aggressive, but you're then punished by this high TTK, which severely limits your fighting potential in any engagement that's not 1v1 starting with full health. It's also a distinctly Black Ops flavor within the COD universe, and there's a strong dissonance to have it here in a modern warfare game, where it's historically never been. It's by far the single element I disliked the most, and by simply adjusting it to be more in line with the last two MW games, I think my enjoyment level would go up exponentially. Last year's timed release tiered perk system has been replaced with what they're now calling gear, basically an attempt to physically represent the attributes given by perks. It's a cute idea, and it does seem to have changed the flavor of the perks this time around. For example, faster weapon swap speed is tied to a pair of gloves, while dead silence is granted by a pair of boots. Most of the stuff you would expect is here, like starting with more ammo or reducing killstreak cost by 1, but there's also some stuff that further speeds up the game, either outright with stat buffs or by enabling more actions such as reloads while sprinting. I wasn't expecting it, but this is probably the most competent and well thought out piece of design in MW3. All of the attributes are actually useful without being too over the top, and the simplicity of their implementation is a welcome change after MW2's very weird take on perks. The gunsmith will largely continue to work as it did in MW2, with 5 attachment slots and attachments that carry over between multiple weapons, with the same interwoven unlock paths I bemoaned last year also making a return. Really, the biggest impact on weapon customization will not come from the gunsmith itself, but from the significantly reduced ADS time. It means you don't have to spend so many attachments building for speed, which has previously been the priority in 6v6 multiplayer. Interestingly, this beta held back on kill streaks more than any other COD beta I think I've ever played. The few featured were all very boring and surprisingly underpowered given the ramped up pace of gameplay. I'd say the most notable new addition was the Guardian, which is an area denial tool that naturally plays best in objective-based modes. The highest streak available was the Juggernaut at 8 kills, and he's really weak this time around, coming equipped with a semi-auto shotgun and a riot shield. I managed to get it a few times, and it didn't feel special at all. All the maps featured in this beta, except for the big team ground war stuff, which I opted to skip this year, were remakes of maps from Modern Warfare 2 2009. Even before this game was officially announced, we knew these maps would be an integral part of the package, but what I didn't realize is that at launch, they're the only part of the package. The acclaim for OG MW2 is basically universal, and while I didn't play it quite as much as COD 4 or World at War, its maps are undoubtedly iconic, not just for COD, but shooters as a whole. That being said, it's hard to get excited for a new $70 game consisting only of them, and I can't think of any precedent for something like this happening outside of literal remakes and remasters, which in some ways might have been preferable. Even if you love it and it's exactly what you want, you have to admit that it's a bad look and ripe for criticism. How do I feel about playing on these maps in 2023? They're fine, I guess. While this new game's movement and gunplay are both pretty different from what COD was in 2009, I don't find the interaction between the two to be particularly toxic, but I don't find it to be particularly compelling either. There's definitely some minor changes to the maps. I haven't played MW2 since probably 2010, but things like the addition of interactable doors and additional points for clambering are clearly new since they were not possible with 2009's mechanics. Favela definitely benefits the most from that second part, and I'm happy to see the emphasis on verticality make a return after it was notably absent from MW2's maps at launch. I must have forgotten about Skid Row at some point in the last decade though, because every match I played on it was a bad time. There's tons of narrow lanes and choke points, and the flow isn't good at all, especially in objective-based modes. I will say that all these maps have been redone thoroughly from an artistic and graphical perspective. Everything is extremely attractive, both in macro and micro detail. High Rise definitely stands out. They've gone with a time of day where the sun kind of envelops the map with a warm glow. It's really nice. I appreciate the effort on that front, but it's still hard to get excited about these map remakes when it's literally all there is, and their inclusion feels kind of random considering that this isn't a remake or remaster, or even all that spiritually similar to 2009. The biggest concern I have about MW3 was not addressed by the beta, and that's the fact that all MW2 and Warzone 2.0 content is crossing over into this game day one. With the sheer amount of weapons alone, it's a balancing nightmare, and MW2's weapons were designed and balanced around a totally different TTK and pace. I can't even fathom how it's going to play out, and it makes it impossible to say how this game will actually play in practice on day one. Modern COD games always have the tendency to devolve into madness as the year goes on with DLC content, but the launch period always has some semblance of purity. MW3 won't even have that. It's going to be Doom Super Shotguns and Nicki Minaj skins on day one, and God knows what it'll be like by the time the year is done. It's kind of a shame because aside from the ADHD movement, this game is surprisingly tame with its weapons and systems, but it's almost like what I played is less of a real product and more like a theoretical or idealized one. Regardless, I have to admit that a lot of what I feared this game would be didn't entirely pan out to be reality. Every lobby I played in was not a sauna sweat session, and the movement exploit stuff was not as prominent as I was led to believe. That being said, the movement system still goes too far, and it's the result of overly catering to a very specific audience, which I feel is stifling design in all multiplayer FPS games, not just COD. The TTK just outright sucks in my opinion, and is philosophically at conflict with every other core gameplay change that's been made here compared to MW2. But I still found myself playing this game far more effectively than MW2, and having more fun with it honestly, even in spite of the esports ready tuning. I think it's easy to conflate your skill level in a game with the quality of the game though, and this is where things get complicated for me. I respected MW2 for being bold, for being well made for the most part, but I just didn't have an amazing time playing it. MW3 is the polar opposite. The animations are worse, the sound design is really bad, I'm surprised that everyone isn't talking about that, and of course the maps. They're pretty, but they're old. There's nothing new here, both in terms of literal content and ideas that push the franchise forward or into an interesting direction. So while I'm good at playing it and had more fun with it, I can't say it's a very well-made game, and it feels like little effort and attention was put into it. They've just kind of hit the reset button on what happened last year, which is not entirely a bad thing, and that's clearly what a lot of people wanted. I just wish it could have been done with more vigor, and without throwing away absolutely everything that Infinity Ward did last year.